if I ask AI to review a scientific paper? Would it sound like a real scientist or get exposed immediately? I recently started receiving peer review reports on my own papers that felt suspicious, extremely polished, but surprisingly generic, almost if they were written by AI. My name is Dr. Mim Rahimi, and I'm an assistant professor at the University of Houston. On this channel, I run experiments to explore questions that I'm personally curious about at the intersection of AI and academic life. In this video, I want to test a simple but a serious question. Can AI right now review a scientific paper? And could it ever perform at a level comparable to a human reviewer?
But first, what is the peer review process? In academic publishing, peer review is the process where a submitted research paper is evaluated by independent experts in the same field before it can be published. According to Nature, peer review is intended to assess the validity, significance, and originality of the research, and to improve the manuscript before publication. After a paper is submitted, the journal editor first performs an initial screening, checking the basic fit, novelty, and ethical compliance. If it passes this stage, the editor invites 2 to 3 expert reviewers to evaluate it in depth. These reviewers examine the methods, clarity, data evidence, and overall contribution, and then return a written report with their recommendations. The editor then makes a decision, typically accept, minor revision, major revision, or reject. In many cases, this process may repeat through multiple revision cycles, until the paper either reaches the journal standard or is declined. At its best, peer review acts as a scientific quality control system, ensuring that only research which is credible, meaningful, and impactful enters the published record. According to the Nature portfolio, artificial intelligence cannot currently serve as a peer reviewer. Peer review relies on the expertise, accountability, and professional judgment of human researchers, and operates on a foundation of confidentiality and trust. Nature explicitly states that peer reviewers should not upload manuscripts into generative AI tools, because these tools may produce inaccurate or biased outputs, and the manuscripts may contain sensitive or proprietary information. Other leading publishers, including the journals Science and the American Chemical Society, have issued the same guidance, emphasizing that AI must not replace human judgment or be trusted with confidential manuscripts. To rigorously evaluate how capable AI really is at reviewing scientific papers and whether it can ever match or replace human peer reviewers, I designed a controlled experiment. I used one of my own recently published research papers in Nature Communications. It is open access, and the full peer review file is also publicly available, which makes it a perfect benchmark for this study. I set up 4 distinct AI reviewer tiers, each with increasing levels of context and capability. Tier 1, the blind reviewer, where I simply upload the paper and ask, "Please review this." Tier 2, the instructed reviewer, where I define its role as a Nature Communications reviewer and give minimal context. Tier 3, or so, the informed reviewer, where I additionally provide access to 10 key reference papers that the AI can read directly from my Google Drive. Tier 4, in the expert reviewer, where I activate agent mode and allow the AI to behave like a multi-expert review panel with access to sources, references, and reasoning tools. I open a completely new chat for each tier, so every review is generated independently, without memory or influence from previous runs. For each reviewer output, I evaluate the AI using 4 criteria: depth of critique, constructiveness, accuracy and understanding, and tone and professionalism, with a score from 1 to 5 for each category. I will then compare all 4 AI-generated reviews directly against the real peer review reports from the Nature Communications reviewers. As for the platform, any generative AI system, such as a large language model, could be used to run this experiment. Here I use ChatGPT, specifically GPT-5, which is one of today's most advanced large language models. All 4 tiers use carefully designed prompts, sometimes a single instruction, sometimes a multi-step setup, and resources are only provided when appropriate. Overall, this experiment is built to be fair, controlled, and as realistic as possible, to push AI to its practical limits and see how good it can truly be as a peer reviewer.
So let's start with the blind reviewer. Basically, the prompt for the blind reviewer is the least that we could provide. And also I'm attaching the actual Word file that we initially submitted to the journal. So we're not actually submitting a published article. It's rather just a Word document that we initially and originally submitted to Nature Communication. And for the prompt of this one, as mentioned, this would be very general. And it says,
please review the attached research paper as if you were a peer reviewer for a scientific journal. Provide your overall assessment, main comments, and any suggestions for improvement.
So it just took a few seconds to prepare the report, and my very first impression is that it looks okay. It does the job in terms of having those sections that we normally see in review reports, such as the sort of the overall assessment. We don't necessarily have the term like overall assessment, but this is like the content that you normally see at the beginning of reviewing a scientific paper. And then it made it more specific to come to major comments and then using bullet points and numbers, which are okay, but it's a little bit odd sometimes to see like this very specific, very organized kind of comments. And then it comes to the next section, which is minor comments. And then as expected, it comes with a recommendation at the end of the day. And the verdict is accept after minor revision. For the disclosure, this paper was going through the major revision and 2 rounds of revision. So this minor revision was a little bit soft and a little bit nice at the end of the day. But we want to actually see the content and then put it into those 4 categories to be able to benchmark it against the human-generated review process. If you want, you can pause the video and then read this. I'm going to highlight the key parts that are mentioned here. First, it started very bold, talking about this is an excellent and highly original manuscript. This would be very bold, I would say, to start. I won't start my assessment like that. So this is a little bit sort of pseudo exaggerating. So this is not something that we normally see. Then starts to be a little bit general. This is what we normally see in any kind of text that it comes from, for example, ChatGPT. For example, this work is timely, so this is very general. Clearly written and experimentally rigorous. So this could be applied to any kind of review report. So this is not very specific, this one. And it offers a meaningful advance towards scalable, cost-effective electrochemical carbon capture. Slightly getting there is touching base on the actual process and what we're also highlighting, which is the scalability of the new process we're proposing. Still not there. I won't be, this could be applied with a little bit of wording change to basically any kind of experimental work, basically. And then it goes on with finally talking about a metric, 50% reduction in levelized costs. This is what we are basically mentioning in the abstract, so nothing fancy and nothing too specific about the paper itself. Then in terms of the major comments, the novelty and impact, mechanistic discussion, we really don't have it much on the mechanistic discussion. It's just an elaboration of what could happen, but when it comes to mechanistic discussion, this could be a delicate term to refer to a field of study, basically. So this is not what we did here. It was just the basic mechanistic study that as it wasn't the focus. And then energy and efficiency. Oh, this is the part that it gets a little bit quantitative. So 60 to 76 kilojoule per mole CO2. This is actually the value, the range of the value we reported. And then it's suggesting, so the basis for this value should be shown explicitly in the main text, not only supporting information. Interesting, because this is a big part of the paper. I mean, energetics, energy requirement for the process, that was one of the things we elaborated on. And this was there, and we elaborated so much. So it's interesting because sometimes it's talking about something that wasn't there, like durability and stability, but then ignoring something that was comprehensively covered. And then number 6 is talking about figures and presentation. Figures 2 to 4 are excellent, but figure 1 could be simplified, perhaps more detailed process component. Wrong, because figure 1 is just a schematic of the process, and it's not that complicated, but it's interesting that ChatGPT thinks that it's complicated. Interesting. It could be complicated when we look at it, but if somebody's a technical person looking at that, it won't be that complicated. So I put the figure here. You can judge that. Maybe it's too complicated, but I think it's not. And we provided the least amount of information to deliver the intended message for this figure. My overall impression is that if I receive this kind of review, I'm a little bit lost. I don't know what they're asking exactly. It's not a clear roadmap for me to revise the paper. Some of them are like vague, some of them very general. Is it technical? It tried, but it failed. Not there. Do I know if this is written by ChatGPT if I see it? For sure. This is very neat. This is very clean. This is general. It's touching the surface. So that's probably the biggest thing we notice here. It's not digging deeper. Sometimes most of the time reviewers are the expert in the field. So they dig deeper and then they provide very valuable suggestion, as the reviewers of this paper did. And it made us think about some aspect of the paper differently. So this is not the kind of review that we sort of appreciate and then we take action. So now let's look at the criteria that we had to evaluate each specific review. For the first criteria, which was the depth of the criteria, 1 out of 5. It tried, but it failed. So in terms of the second criteria, constructiveness, I would say this wasn't very constructive. This is not an action item that we can take to improve the quality of the paper. So I would go with 1 out of 5 for that. The third criteria, accuracy and understanding. It wasn't 100% accurate. I would go with 2 out of 5. So in terms of the fourth criteria, tone and professionalism, I think the tone was okay. And in terms of professionalism, it was too much, I would say. It was exaggerating. Even from the beginning, the choice of word was too bold to be real, to take it serious, for example, for the editor that is reading this review report. So overall, I go with 2 out of 5 for that. So let's move on to the second tier reviewer, which is the instructed reviewer. The whole purpose of doing this is not providing more information about the paper itself, but rather provide more information about what to do. So this is more on the prompt engineering side of the work. So that means we provide information about the role of this chat. We provide information about what the peer review is. And also we provide context about this specific journal, but still no information about the actual paper. So let's see what happens. The prompt itself is obviously more involved compared to the blind reviewer. Now we're defining a role and we're asking specific question. So the prompt says, so up to this point, we only provided general information about how to review a paper, and we just mentioned the journal, Nature Communication. But now we want to go to the journal, to the part that provides information about the reviewer and the review process, and try to bring as much information as we could from the specific journal. So if we go to Nature Communication website and we navigate to for reviewers, it provides a lot of information, a lot of very good information about the whole review process, basically. And now if we navigate to writing your report, we could also provide information about other sections, but I think this is just more to the point. So if we go to write your report, what we want to do is basically copy and paste all this information and try to feed it to our prompt, basically. So I copy and paste this one that is specific to the journal. So now we have everything. The prompt is ready. The prompt is being engineered in a way that does two things. In general, talks about what we're expecting and then making it more specific towards the given journal. So let's see how this instructed reviewer does, and we'll see how it compares to the blind reviewer. First of all, it took a few seconds to start. I could turn on the ChatGPT 5 thinking, but then once it's on auto, that means it decides whether to go with thinking or not. So it decided not to use thinking, and then it was just immediate, as you see here. The review report, it picks the author's name, which was new compared to the first one. It provides a summary, and I see more specifics in the summary, like 90%, 60%. So it makes it more quantitative, 50%, then $70, $50, which are pretty accurate in terms of the values that are provided. So this is a plus. So starting from major, novelty, validation, these two are, I would say, on the general side, but then electrochemical analysis, it makes it a little bit more specific. Mechanistic clarification, attribute efficiency loss to pore blockage, but do not quantify porosity or provide gas permeability data. This is a valid point. This is something that we could consider as a part of the revision. The TEA is a strong addition. The assumed cell lifetime, 8 to 12 years, appeared optimistic given the absence of durability data. Very, very valid. I'd say this is very valid. And then it moves on to the minor comments. Clarity and style, data presentation. Please include error bars for all average data. Some plots mentioned, but do not display them. That's wrong, because we provide error bars, and when we provide error bars, we specifically mention that in the caption. Ensure all figures in supporting information have consistent numberings and legends. This is more like an advice, not sort of a comment for a technical paper. So I would ignore this as well. So the interesting part is the overall recommendation. The first one, the blind reviewer, it was minor review, and now it's major revision. Do I feel like a major revision based on what it's been mentioned? I don't. So if I get this report and then at the end it's asking me to do major revision, I'm a little bit confused. This was not very major, what it was asked. So it's not very consistent in terms of the verdict and the justification for that verdict. So this is something that I'm not very comfortable with. Okay, so now let's go to the criteria to be able to benchmark this instructed reviewer against other kind of reviewers and also the human-generated reviews. So in terms of the first criteria, the depth, I would go with 2. It was deeper than the first one for sure, but not there yet. Constructiveness, this is pretty much the same as the first one, so I would go with 1. In terms of accuracy and understanding, I think this was slightly better than the first one, not much. But in terms of accuracy specifically, you saw that figure example, that's not that's not correct. And this is not acceptable when you receive a report from the reviewer, which has like a very obvious mistake. But in general, it was able to pick the actual values. So the values were not off. And in terms of the understanding, it had some understanding of the paper, so better than the first one. So I would go with 2.5 for this section. And in terms of tone and professionalism, I would go with 2, the same as the first one. Okay, so now let's focus on tier 3 reviewer, which is the informed reviewer. So the whole idea of the informed reviewer is that it has all the information, like the instructed reviewer, tier 2, plus specific information about this paper. What it means is that the idea is we provide 10 of the most relevant references as a PDF file to the chat, and we ask ChatGPT when it's reviewing to have a special eye towards those references. So basically the PDF is available. That means every single information in each paper is available, and now it knows that it's somehow related to this paper, and obviously these are from the references list, and I know which one is the most relevant. So in terms of the prompt, it has a 2 steps prompt. The first one is similar to the instructed prompt. So we're copying the same exact prompt as the second reviewer, basically providing all the information about the review process, and also we are providing the specific guideline from that specific journal, which is Nature Communication, similar to the previous case. However, at the end, I just want to mention that this is part 1, and you're going to receive the second prompt before you draft the review process. So now it's ready for the first set of information. It should say ready for references. Okay, ready for references. Here is the second prompt. So as it says, all the PDF files of those 10 references are uploaded on Google Drive. And as you see here, and I use the last name of the first author, the abbreviation of the journal, and the year. So these are the 10, and I use a good blend of review plus research articles here. And now what I'm using here, I'm going to turn on the sources in ChatGPT, and in the sources, I already linked my Google Drive. So the first time you probably need to link it. And now I turn that on. So it's basically when it says my Drive review resources, it goes to that specific folder in my Google Drive and reads in that specific from that specific folder. But before we hit this and run this one, I want to just do a very quick demo to make sure that it accesses the specific file from my Google Drive. So it's not basically getting those general information from the web. And to test that, I opened a new chat, and in the new chat, I pasted a prompt. The prompt says,
Go to my Google Drive folder. Read the document and tell me briefly about the following: the full title of the paper, the journal it was published in, the publication year, and a very short paragraph summarizing what the paper is about.
So as you see, I'm specifically pointing to a paper in Google Drive. So what I need to do is turn on the sources and also make sure that Google Drive is turned on. And now let's see what happens. Okay, so after 20 seconds, it provided the information, the title, an electrochemically mediated amine regeneration process with a mixed absorbent for post-combustion CO2 capture, which is actually very accurate. The journal is also ESNT, Environmental Science and Technology, year 2020. And also, yeah, very accurate. It even didn't elaborate it on this abbreviation, so it just provided the final abbreviation. And then the metrics are pretty accurate, that 100 hours, 10% cut. So this is very nice. And just to show you this file in Google Drive, we can go there and see this would be this one. And that's exactly the title that was identified, the journal. It's in year 2020. And then basically I'm using that EDA, AEEA. So it's working in terms of being able to access all these PDF files in the folder. So we can go back to the prompt, and now the sources are on, and also the Google Drive is on. So we just need to hit run. Okay, this time is thinking, which is for the first time compared to the other two. It's reading Google Drive. Tier 1 and Tier 2 reviewer, they were pretty fast. It took probably less than 10 seconds to prepare the report, but this is taking some time. Okay, 33 seconds. It starts with overview, then major comments, and yeah, 8 major comments, and then going towards minor comments and author to-do checklist, because we ask for these actionable items. An overall recommendation is major review. I'm glad that it didn't reject the paper, and providing the same metrics as the previous one. Again, this is something that you can easily find in the abstract of the paper. Okay, this is an interesting one. Relative to the previous process, the novelty is in the architecture rather than chemical. So this is a nice catch. So it identified that we didn't modify the chemical. This is fundamentally redesign of the architecture. So that was a very nice catch, but then the rest is just more general. I was wishing for more because I provided tons of reviews, tons of different papers that I was expecting to see more of the metrics of this paper to be compared with other papers. Here, only this paragraph is just comparing the two, is really, really using those references that I provided. The first point, architectural difference was very nice, very accurate, but then it gets again very general. Let's move on to the major comments, and it provides 8 major comments, and see if we have any useful comment that we can basically act upon. So the first comment is asking us to position ourselves better in the context of other papers, which I think this is a pretty useful comment. So basically the metric that we're defining here, we need to benchmark it against other papers that are out there. The per se conventional process versus our process. So this could be good. This could be something that we can easily adapt and could provide further insight about the paper itself. So I would say this is still a little bit leaning towards a general comment, but it's actionable. Okay, let's move on and see if we get something more useful. So the third comment is asking about providing more evidence about something that we claim in the paper. Let's say we had an observation in the paper and we thought this is the reason. So what it's suggesting is, why not doing some experimental measurement, for example, the contact angle, to actually test the hypothesis we have there. I think this is good, but it falls outside of the scope of this paper. Somehow it's providing, again, an actionable suggestion, but then it's just not there. It could be more related to the overall scope of the paper. So here it's trying to criticize what we suggested. For example, as a side note, we suggested that we can use water vapor as a potential sweep gas. And it's acknowledging that it's interesting, but then it has some problems, which I think this is pretty valid. So I like this comment. It's just asking us, it's just questioning us to elaborate more on something that we suggested on the site. That is specific to this paper, actionable, and something that was originally a bit vague. So one clear observation here is that it's trying its best to use those references that we defined in Google Drive. So somehow it has this mission of fit all of those 10 references in this comment. So it could be a little bit misleading for providing, let's say, those specific references. So it's just drafting the whole report around those that are provided. So it could be a little bit objective. In terms of the minor comments, sometimes it's just talking about something, define something. We did over and over throughout the paper. So this is something that is similar to tier 1 and 2, that it makes those mistakes that are pretty obvious. So sometimes it doesn't provide a general comment, rather it provides a little bit like somewhere between general and specific comment. So this geometric versus electrochemically active surface area is a comment that you could give to any electrochemical paper, including our paper. Again, another comment that asking us to clarify something that was basically one of the core metrics that we kept clarifying, and it was pretty clear, I think, in the paper. So the actionable items are based on major and minor comments, and so as I mentioned, some of them are pretty useful, some of them are a little bit off, and some of them are still very general. And as we talked about, this is providing a major revision, which to me still, based on what I see, the actions that I need to take, this doesn't look like a major revision. It looks like a minor revision with some required revision that are specific to this paper and some general polishing of the paper. Okay, so let's go for the criteria. In terms of the depth, I think this was better than the first two for sure. I would give it 3, slightly higher than the average, but still not there. This was my expectation was a little bit higher based on 10 main references we provided. So it could be deeper in terms of the content that was provided. In terms of constructiveness, it was better again than the first two. It was, I would say, significantly better than the first two, because we had at least 1 or 2 or maybe 3 points that we could take action and improve the quality, the actual quality of the paper. So I would give it 3, slightly again higher than the average. In terms of the accuracy and understanding, it went slightly beyond the abstract. It talked more about some of the metrics we had, but still, like those C that clarify this, define this, those are already there. So when I see those kind of comments, it's a little bit, it bothers me. And it feels like it's coming from a generative AI. In terms of the tone and professionalism, I would say similar to the first two. The tone was very polished. This is not something that I normally see. This is very, very well written and also very organized. So I don't see a major difference between this and the previous 2 tiers. So I would give it 2. So my overall impression about tier 3, I think this was significantly better than the first 2, for sure. And I think what made it better was obviously providing those references specific to this journal. Okay, now let's push the limit and see how far we can go with using ChatGPT for reviewing a paper. So let's focus on the 4th tier, which is the expert reviewer. For the expert reviewer, similar to tier 2 and 3, we provide the context. So basically we talk about the fact that we're reviewing for Nature Communication, and also we provide the guideline to how to write a review, similar to the previous 2 tiers. Also similar to tier 3, we provide the resources specific to this paper. So going to Google Drive and then access those 10 key references and be able to basically use those as a specific resource for this review report. On top of that, what we're doing for specific to this tier 4, which is the expert review, we basically form a panel of the different expertise. So one has expertise in electrochemistry, the other has expertise in material science, and so on. And then they talk to each other, and then eventually provide a report based on all the consideration from different expertise. And to enable that, what we're doing in ChatGPT is using the agent mode. So the agent mode is basically going back and forth and just doing sort of a dynamic, cyclic kind of process. And also through the agent mode, we're able to access the agent to the folder. So what we need to do is first copy the prompt, which is also a two-step kind of prompt, similar to the previous one. The prompt 1 is basically to provide context specific to nature communication. Okay, here we provided prompt 1, which is basically talking about the context and also providing the guidance on nature communication on how to write a report. And then at the end, it's just confirming that it's ready for expert panel formation, which is basically a part of prompt 2. Okay, now that we have prompt 2 here, what we need to do is basically activate agent mode. And then once the agent mode is activated, we make sure that the Google Drive is also on. And also we indicated that the agent is also allowed to use web search. So it's basically not relying only on those references, but also going on the web to basically provide more context and information for the report. So while these two are on and the agent mode is also on, I think we're ready to go. So let's see what happens. So started with thinking, probably like planning on what to do, and then setting up the desktop. That basically what the agent does is provide sort of a desktop for the environment that it's going to work with. And then on that specific desktop is sort of searching, doing all the fun things we ask for. So now as you see, it's searching available Google Drive and then trying to fetch the information from there. So one thing that could be confusing here is that the paper is already published. So it's maybe as a part of this search, it will find the actual paper and see, okay, it's very similar to what is out there. So I'm just curious what happens there. I think it shouldn't be a big deal, but will be interesting. Okay, the report is ready. It took 5 minutes. If we click on that, it basically shows what happened, and we can basically see the whole process. And I think we can go back and see what exactly happened. And now we have the report itself. Okay, so the first impression is very similar to the previous reports. Starts with overview and then major comments and minor comments and some checklist and the final recommendation. I'm just curious, what's the final recommendation here? Is major revision again. So I'm glad that it didn't reject the paper. It's longer than the previous 3 for sure. And let's see, it does have references. So one thing that is happening here is that some of the references actually the paper itself. And as I mentioned, this could be a little bit of issue, but then it seems it's not using that as a reference that this specific submission is very similar to that, but rather it's using some of the claims in the paper to justify what we have in this manuscript, which is literally the paper itself. Interesting. So starting from some general expression of the paper and then trying to be more specific towards the end, and talking about some metrics that we saw also in the previous reviewers. And here it reads more like an abstract of the paper. So again, general at the beginning, but then it gets a little bit more to the details. And what we normally see from a review report is it's not that much of explaining the paper. So this is, I would say, too much of explaining, because obviously they're writing this for the authors and they already know what's in the paper. So explaining that much is a little bit unusual. And now to the major comments. Okay, so the previous study, this is interesting, have focused on chemistry optimization and electrode materials, which is wrong. The previous study, which is basically the current study, only focus on fundamentally redesigning the process. That means we didn't work on amine selection, neither the additives. It was just not there at all. And also the electrode material. These are literally the three aspects that we didn't look into in this paper, which is, again, the current paper. But then retained the same AEM-based configuration. Wrong. That was literally, as you see, a membraneless process. There is no anion exchange membrane. There's no AEM there. So this is wrong. And it's so confident about what it's saying. I'm actually glad that it's basically finding that a specific paper as a reference, as something that is relevant out there, and it's just trying to get some information from there. This paper is already open access, so every single information is accessible. And I'm surprised at how wrong this is in terms of using that reference to talk about something not relevant to that paper. One other interesting thing is it's referring to University of Houston news coverage, which is unusual, highly unusual. I haven't seen a review report that does say such a thing. No, that's very unusual. It reads like a report for a paper or it reports for news. Okay, so I'm reading this novelty and context of prior work, and I was expecting sort of a major comment in the context of major revision, something that I need to do. But all I see is basically talking about the paper itself, good things about the paper. So it's just explaining what I know about the paper, plus several noticeable errors. And I'm guessing the same thing would happen here also, talking about electrochemical mechanism and data quality. So again, this talking about the basics of the process, then more about the process. Again, number 2 is similar to number 1. There's no major comment here. It's just talking about an aspect of the work, a major aspect of the work, but not something that the authors are not aware of. Materials and cell engineering. It picked some of the design parameters that we used. That's nice. Some of the tests we did, but that's the least I could expect because it has the Word file and all the information about the paper. So, again, it's referring to this paper, which is published. And then the text that it's referring to, it's way outside of the context of that specific reference. We didn't mention ammonia, we didn't mention piperazine or additives to improve kinetic. We didn't mention any of them. And I was using that as a reference for a statement that is sort of also irrelevant to the comment. So yeah, this is disappointing. I think number 5 and 6 would be the same, just talking about. No, here we have a suggestion. The manuscript is well structured. The introduction provides context and cites relevant literature on ECC categories. Why there's a reference here? This is weird. It's just a statement from the reviewer. It doesn't fit, especially the fact that the reference is this paper. However, the narrative could be tightened. Yeah, I agree. The description on the conventional EMR is long, could be condensed with schematic. Okay, I was getting excited, but now it killed it. So the description is long, but we provided a schematic. That's the whole point of figure 1. So I'm guessing the minor comments are also pretty much the same. Okay, now let's go to checklist. Mechanistic analysis. Provide quantitative analysis of mass transport and bubble dynamic. This is good. This is something that we didn't look into, but is 100% relevant to what we reported, basically. We didn't elaborate much on mass transport and the dynamics of bubbles, but if the reviewer asked that, we would say this is a nice comment, and then we try to address that. So this is executable, and this is fair. Then material characterization, report porosity, thickness, and wettability of GDE. This is also good. This is something that was missing from the original one because we just got the commercial materials. Okay, number 3, include replicates. We did. So, no. Broader impact, very general. This is one of those general ones that I normally don't see it from an actual report. Sometimes, but not very often. So the final recommendation and justification is a relatively long justification to say why this requires major revision. Do I see major revision from the report? No. It doesn't look like a major revision. It reads like a report of what we submitted, what we already know, with maybe 2 good suggestions that we could basically act upon to improve the quality of the paper, and 1 neutral. That's it. And it doesn't refer to major revision. Those are leaning towards minor revision. It's just extra information that we need to provide to make a stronger argument. It provides the sources. I'm just curious what sources it used. Obviously, the paper itself twice, and then this .gov kind of resource. Again, the paper itself, that report, news from the University of Houston. So in terms of the citations, poorly done. Now let's talk about the criteria. To be honest, I was a little bit disappointed about this agent mode. It made it too complicated, I guess, and it was relying heavily on a few resources. So back to criteria of the benchmarking. For the depth, I would give it 2.5, like somewhere between tier 2 and tier 3. And for constructiveness, this was good, but not very constructive. So again, I put it as 2, somewhere between 2 and 3. And for accuracy, I was disappointed. I was especially disappointed when the agent mode is on, that it can go back and forth when needed between different references and also the internet to check whether an information is accurate or not. So we found several critical issues coming from the same references. So this was very disappointing. I would give it probably 2. The tone and professionalism, I gave 2 to the previous one. And surprisingly here, I want to go for a little bit lower. Maybe 1.5 is fair. The reason is that it's too much in terms of, it's not professional to provide these sort of references, random references in random places. And I think it comes from the nature of the agent mode, that we probably try hard to push it and to design it that way. Maybe this was the problem of the prompt. It's, I think, to some extent subjective to the prompt, but the way we did it, the way we designed the experiments, it came as the lowest by a margin. Okay, so what did we actually learn from this experiment? Across all tiers, the AI-generated reviewers were like fairly easy to recognize. It was very easy to spot. So they read like someone who had skimmed the paper and extracted the main facts, but lacked the depth, the intuition, and also the intellectual rigor that is required for a real reviewer. So the biggest weakness was the constructiveness. You saw that in almost all the tiers, and then the AI struggled to offer sort of a meaningful suggestion for improvement, which sort of makes sense considering that how the lack of deep and intellectual understanding of the content. So the depth of the critique was also very limited. Accuracy was okay in most cases, but then the occasional mistakes were very, very bold, and that would not be acceptable in a real reviewer. So the tone and professionalism were like, again, acceptable, but it was very polished, actually too polished to be like a human-generated review. So interestingly, the more advanced tier did not always mean better. We saw that tier 3 performed the best, but tier 4, the system became, I think, overly complicated. and the review quality actually dropped. So back to the original question, how good is AI right now as a peer reviewer? I think it's still clearly behind human and easy to detect, but could it ever match human level? I genuinely don't know. A few years ago, even this level of performance was unthinkable. If one day the system are able to reason, to argue, maybe they reach that level of depth that is required, that sort of level of intellectual rigor that we require for like reviewing a paper. So maybe that day, maybe it could compete. But for now, it's not there yet.